Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to another glorious edition of Ask That. And today we are going to have a fruitful conversation about career coaching, design, career, German last names, whatever have you. Today I am joined with none other than Rachel Krause, not to be confused with my German heritage of Krause, although spelled exactly the same. Rachel, how are you doing?
I am great. How are you?
I'm doing well. I'm looking forward to this conversation. We've been going back and forth on career and coaching and design, and there's been a few designers on which I absolutely love. And so before we dive into this softer side of life, why don't you give everybody a quick intro on who you are?
Sure. So I am Rachel Krause, the Krause versus Krause. And I am a user experience engineer at Concurrency. I know you just had Damon Sanchez on a
Yep,
few days ago.
yep.
So we work together, consulting Microsoft technologies, and we just work to give the best user experience and help out our teams wherever we can. So some days we might be working on a modern apps project, which is brand new technology from scratch, or other days, you might see us dipping into SharePoint or other Microsoft
Oh,
technologies like that. Yeah,
oh,
I know.
well, there's no number of designers that can fix SharePoint. Let's just move on from that. Um, yeah, and so we have talked about design stuff, and you and I kind of want to take this a little bit different direction and talk about I don't know, industry a little bit, both design or tech, jobs just in general. I think it'll be interesting to see where this goes. Um, you mentioned that you do a lot of coaching.
Yeah.
What let's define that a little bit, and what does that really look like?
Sure. So I love to speak on all things UX, Agile, just kind of collaboration and working together well as a team. So I do workshops at conferences. I'm going to be coming up at Fluent in San Jose this coming June, leading a workshop on collaboration and UX. And it's really just getting the team to all be involved in the UX process and the design of an app. It shouldn't just rest on just a UX person or just the design team. It should really be the responsibility of everybody. So I go in and kind of teach some basic skills, and then it's really just helping facilitate activities and teaching them how to facilitate these activities. So it's pretty cool. We work on proto personas, journey mapping, actual like drawing and designing of the applications, and
Sure,
then I do talks on usability testing and kind of the whole gamut of the
sure.
UX process.
So who's all involved in that? Are we talking about a bunch of black turtleneck designers, kind of the stereotypical designer? Are we talking business people, developers? Who all gets involved there?
So I've done the workshops a couple of different ways. I've done it at a client where they wanted senior management involved along with developers and designers. I've done mostly designers with a little bit of developers and product people mixed in, and then on a team of everyone without any design whatsoever. So there's a lot of companies, especially like as UX is getting more of a buzzword and people are more interested in it, there's a lot of teams that can't afford UX right now, but they still want to have a say in the UX process and they still want to make a usable application. So going into a team that doesn't have UX is a great way to give them just a little taste of it and how they could at least keep those things in mind while they're designing.
So what does that look like? I mean, are, doesn't have UX, gonna have UX? Are we getting into? I mean, that's a career in itself.
It is, absolutely. And I definitely don't want to discount the value of a real UX professional on a
Sure,
team.
totally. Yep.
Um,
Except there's
but,
not enough. So I mean,
right.
there's a very limited set of designers and good designers. Nothing against, I guess there's bad in every walk of life.
Everyone has something to
Yeah,
learn.
yeah, I was gonna say that didn't come out right. Um, but there's certainly a smaller subset of designers, UX designers, and design goes a lot of different directions from print to digital, whatnot. But anyways, what does that really look like for a team that doesn't have one?
Yeah, so I've done it before where I've started out, and it's a multi-session process. You know, the first session, maybe we're just talking about why UX is important and understanding the value of UX, which if you've gotten to the point where you need coaching and training on something like that, chances
I
are you
already
already
believe it.
understand it. Yeah,
Yep. Yep.
you're already bought in.
Sure.
But there's always a couple people, whether it's senior management, whether it's developers, who need that level of buy-in and who need that kind of definition. So we start out with definitions, and then we'll talk about proto personas, which is really huge in the UX lean UX world, I should say. And the reason I go to proto personas, it's an easier way to get involved in the UX and kind of understand it, because there's not a whole bunch of upfront research you need to do. And when you don't have a UX team to help you with that,
Sure.
any little bit helps. So it's really, I would rather have a dev team without a UX person like do a little bit of UX than no UX.
Okay.
So I try to keep it basic.
So what's proto persona for those who don't know?
Sure. So a persona in itself is like a visual or content representation of who's actually using your application.
Okay.
And so a regular persona is usually backed by a lot of market research, competitive research, understanding who your users are. A proto persona, on the other hand, is more assumptions based. So the caveat with that is once you do assumptions based, so I'm going to assume I know who my user is, I'm going to find who I assume my user is and actually test these hypotheses. Yeah, and then I'm going to update it based on what I find. So a proto persona is never final. It's something that's changing based on how much research you actually get once you actually start.
So what does the actual concrete asset of this look like? Are we talking Word documents that have, some text in them? Are we talking Illustrator of, fanciness?
Yeah. So I'm a huge advocate for lean UX, and I try to not do more than I have to.
Sure.
Don't we all?
Yeah, I mean, a lazy developer is a fantastic developer.
So I try to do whatever I can to move the team forward. So if I'm doing a proto persona or a persona, I'm not going to really highly design it. Maybe I'll draw a little stick figure or something.
Sure.
All I really want is for you to get the idea that we're talking about a real person. And instead of writing a user story that says, as a user, I want you to say, as Hank, my, warehouse user, this is my user story. And so anything to get a face to a name, whether it's a sketch or, a PowerPoint document or whatever it is.
Yeah, humanize it.
Definitely.
Are there some things that you should humanize more than others? Like, are we just talking like it's Hank and he's a plumber and he's a, foreman? Or are we really trying to dive into like how Hank is going to use the thing?
A little bit of both. So I do look at demographics when I'm creating a persona, and that tells me certain things. So if someone is working in a warehouse, for example, and they're paid hourly, chances are they don't have a lot of extra time to, do frivolous things in an app. And that tells me that a user need would be that I need to get in and out quickly. Sure. And so some of those demographics can really drive the user needs, the goals, some of the frustrations they have. If I know that Hank uses a Windows phone, I might know that he will have trouble getting mobile apps on his phone, as an example. Sorry, Windows phone users.
Harsh reality.
So yeah, it's a mix of both.
Okay, so we've gone through as a development team. So let's just assume for now we don't have a designer. So we've made our proto persona. Now what? We've got some documents. Hank, we need a lady. Hank. Just trying to think of a kid's storybook that goes with Hank. Jack and Jill. So We've got Jack and Jill. We've got them defined. Now what?
Yeah, so your proto persona or your persona in general, they can drive pretty much any UX decision that you make. And obviously, like, we want to have all of our apps probably have multiple types of users. So we'll probably have a few proto personas. And because they're so lightweight and easy to make, you can easily get 3 or 4, however many you need. Try not to go more than that. But they can influence decisions we make. They can influence priority of what features we work on. If I find that 3 of the 4 of my user types are going to use this feature, maybe I prioritize that higher than something that only Hank would use. And then we can also start thinking about user journeys. So how is Hank going to actually use the feature? What steps do they take to get through the process? We can think about their surroundings, where they are when they're using the application, if they are in a warehouse versus if they're at home on their phone. So it drives a lot of the decisions into the design that aren't necessarily visual.
Yeah, you mentioned user journey, and I don't want to gloss over that. Let's define what that means, because I think it's very easy for us to just start building something and assume a journey and not really be intentional about it.
Right. Yeah. And I do it too. I assume a
Sure.
journey, but I think when you go through the exercise of journey mapping and you're thinking about the user, you can identify what steps a user takes when they're doing that feature. And so when you identify each step, you think about all the needs, the things that they're doing when they're actually in that step.
Sure.
Like I mentioned before, where are they? What device are they using? And then from there, you can look at kind of like that emotional state of the user. So if I am hitting an error, what is my frustration level? Am I delighted? Am I really frustrated?
Yeah.
And it's a great way to identify those pain points in your process. And from those pain points where you see on your map, it kind of goes into a map where you're going up and down in emotional state. Those lower levels of emotional state, I can identify areas for improvement there. So I can look at, if I make this quick fix, if I make this error message more human readable, I can move that frustration level up a couple steps there.
Sure. I mean, this is all fine and dandy. This is like great designer stuff, but we got features to get out the door. And what you're really, I mean, you're talking about spending a chunk of your time forever saying, I actually give a shit about my user and their experience. I mean, are we really there as an industry to do that, or is that just for the fancy startup folks?
I definitely think it's possible anywhere. And another reason why I'm a huge lean UX advocate is that this doesn't have to take long. I have done the really drawn out, facilitated processes of this, which I think are very valuable. And anytime you can do an hour meeting with the whole team involved on this, I say do it. However, if I'm in a design session and I'm designing something or the team is designing something or whatever, because we're always going to design it as we go, you can do a quick gut check as to, okay, how would Hank be feeling right now? And it's really just asking that question, and then putting yourself in your persona's shoes and not in your own shoes. So think like your actual user, not a general user or not yourself.
Sure.
But yeah, I think it sounds overwhelming. It sounds time consuming, but it doesn't have to be.
Yeah. So then where do we go next?
Well,
in some regards, right, this is a bit of a culture change, and even if we want to bring, and I know we were talking about this earlier, we want to bring folks in to play this role. I mean, can we take a junior person? Does it have to be a senior person? There's a lot here in trying to make something that's competitive and user friendly, and at the end of the day, I'm sure somebody wants to make sure that their revenue is getting met because, hey, it's great. We got people on staff who are drawing boxes and line them together, and we've said it, blue is a better shade of green.
Yeah, I think so. Journey maps, as an example, journey maps are a great way to test if what you're building is actually going to be used. So in order to generate revenue, people actually have to use what you're building. So if you're actually testing the journey map, let's say I haven't built anything yet, and I want to start this new feature, and I kind of want to validate if these steps are true. I can go find someone of my personas, send them through this hypothetical workflow, okay, and they can kind of, gut check to see, are we building the right thing anyway?
So when you say test, you're talking actually going through with a human and testing it, not like some crazy automated process.
Yeah, if possible. And it doesn't have to be, so like, for example, I've worked on a lot of applications with an NDA. So sure. I can't necessarily find, Joe Schmo off the street and test with him. And I might not necessarily have access to those subject matter experts. So I have to improvise. but you can get baseline usability from anybody. You can get if I do a quick usability test and I want you to, where do you think this button would go? That can give me some usability feedback. And again, something is better than nothing.
Sure.
So any little things that you can do, I think can help, just help get you to a more usable product.
Sure. I want to unpack something you said. You like when you said about the button, where do you think this button would go? Like what does that interaction look like? I mean, is this you having those conversations with the development group or with the management team?
Yeah, so a lot of times when I speak about usability testing, I can do it multiple different ways. So you can, I've done it before where I've just pulled a coworker who's not on the project and, hey, this is what the development team is thinking for a design, whether it's a paper prototype or a sketch on my notebook
Sure.
or an actual HTML, CSS, I don't care.
Sure.
You can get it from any of those. And I can sit in front of them, ask them some non-leading questions like, where do you think this would go? As opposed to, do you think this would go to the homepage?
Yeah,
Which
there you go.
difference between
Yep.
leading and non-leading.
Yep.
And they can kind of give me that feedback. If I have let's say I'm testing icons, for example, I think I have a super cool icon and they don't understand it.
Yeah.
That tells me I need to change up a little thing there. And maybe I can ask them for some straight out feedback as well. But I have with usability testing, you mentioned management and dev teams. Whenever possible, I like to get stakeholders, management, dev team involved in at least the viewing of that usability test, because that can show them more than me just coming back and saying, oh yeah, well, they hated this. There's you think I have ulterior motives because I'm a designer,
Sure.
but really I can just show you, here's exactly what they said and how they interacted with it.
So how are you measuring that then? Like are these features baked into what you're doing? Or is this, customer interviews and kind of the product manager side of things, like are we doing it right?
I think it's a little bit of both. Like I said, whenever possible, test with users. However, there are times where if we're just building a login,
Yeah.
I can't, that's really not enough to test.
Sure.
That's the bare bones of my application. So a lot of times we'll talk about it as a team and, maybe we're in a design session where the whole team is together and we're talking about how we're going to actually build the login,
Sure.
maybe tasking out the PBI. So, we'll whiteboard and we'll say, here's what I'm thinking. And then maybe I'll get input from a developer that says, that's technically challenging. Let's bring it back and do it this way. Or a product owner, product manager will say, the business won't like that. Here's, so everyone kind of gets their input into it.
Sure.
And that helps me create something much better than I could on my own.
Sure. What if we're wrong?
I expect it. I
Okay.
expect that we're going to be wrong.
Okay.
And that's what usability testing's for. So prioritizing feedback is something that's hard. It's not an easy thing to do because I want to change it now, but I've got 16 other features beforehand
Sure.
that I have to do before I can make this one better. And I think that's where, having those multiple personas, talking about them as people helps us prioritize where that feedback should lie. Are they going to use this feature first, or is this one bug, or not really a bug, but is this one crappy feature that we did wrong? Is that going to prevent them from even getting to this feature? So should we move that up in priority?
Sure.
So when you have those conversations, it can help you prioritize.
Sure. All right. So let's take it a bit further. So I got a development team. Maybe it's a small shop. I got a development team. We're slinging stuff. We need an experience. The world of the template monsters and crowdfunding of designers and logos and all that kind of stuff. How do you really? When's the right time to fork somebody's template versus really dive into trying to make the experience yours? Or is there a place in the middle that you can kind of get the buy versus build?
Yeah, especially if you're a small shop, it can be hard to justify the spend on a from scratch design.
Sure.
A lot of times when we're working with smaller companies, we'll start with a framework like be it Bootstrap or Skeleton or whatever it is.
Yeah.
And then we design from there. And that helps save us a lot of time. And I think that that's important for, especially for smaller companies. I think what you have to weigh is how much this is going to help me versus how much extra work am I asking for. So
Sure.
let's say, for example, I'm using Bootstrap, but I have a super custom design. Am I really ever going to use
Yeah,
anything
yeah,
from Bootstrap?
yeah.
So that's a good example of that. I can't really speak to like logos or anything. I always think a good logo is great as opposed to making it from like Microsoft Publisher,
Totally.
but
Yep.
but I suck at logos, so I just admire anyone who can do them.
Yep. It's an art form in itself.
Yeah, exactly. Um, but yeah, I think that's a good example of that, and definitely, there's a lot of templates out there that are based on Bootstrap. So like
Sure.
you can go get a template you can put right over Bootstrap, and you get all the CSS and whatnot. But again, if you're making a lot of changes, you might see a hit to performance, or if you buy a popular template, you might see 5 other websites with that
Right.
same template.
Right.
So it's weighing those options of how do you want to stand out. If that's not something that's important to you, I say go for it.
So let's say you got the cool hotness on Template Monster or whatever one of them,
Sure.
and things are going well and revenue's coming in, and now you can afford to do something. But you hate what you got. Is it okay to change? Like, is it okay to redefine yourself a bit and change that user experience? Or are you kind of beholden to what you've now created over the past year, and your billions of users are kind of used to where you put that damn login button, which is backwards?
Sure. Yeah, I mean, software to me is never final. So design is never final. It's always going to change. And I expect that because trends change,
Sure.
competitors change. The one thing I like to say is that don't do a major overhaul and change everything at
That
once.
was going to be one of my questions.
Yeah, do it iteratively. So
Sure.
if I'm going to make a design change to one aspect of the application, maybe I just start with that one, see how people react to it, and then I can slowly introduce more changes. We don't want to overwhelm the user so they just stop using the application. Like
Sure.
Snapchat's a great example recently. People stopped using it because they have a whole brand new
Yeah.
interface that
Yeah.
was like, wait, what?
Yeah.
Small changes
Sure.
iteratively over time.
Sure. But then again, we have iTunes, which will not change whatsoever.
And I
So
will continue to not use it.
that's right. I do not understand why that app remains to be the biggest pile of garbage in the world.
It's pretty awful to use. I'm sorry if anyone has ever had a
I,
hand in designing it, but
I'm sure they hate it too.
yeah.
It's pretty
The
great.
one the one thing I find about especially with Apple lately is that it feels, and this is just a rant, but it feels like their teams are very siloed and they don't necessarily
Yeah.
talk to each other about the designs that they're making, because the way I do something in one app that's Apple created is totally different from another app.
Yeah.
And that gets me frustrated as a user. So if you're working in an application, let's say you're enterprise level, and you have a department for each, like a department for e-commerce, a department for
Sure.
customer service, talk to each other and just make sure that you're not recreating a calendar 5 different ways. Reuse as much as possible because you're going to get that added usability there.
What are some of the best or most innovative things that you've seen?
That's a good question. I love applications that gamify things, that make things
Okay.
like a game for me. Like
Okay.
if it's a banking app, for example, like I don't want to see how much money I don't have. So like make that fun for me. Make that like a reward for me. So I like how whether it's like getting stars or points. I know
Yep.
one of my old coworkers loved the Starbucks app because every time he bought something, he got a little star, or
Yep.
like made this cool animation.
Yep.
Those are things people talk about, and those are things that people remember. If your app is just usable, if you're just on that baseline usable, no one's going to remember it. But if you add that little extra flair and make it delightful as opposed to usable, then it's something that people remember.
Sure. Have you read the book Hooked?
I have not.
You
but
should add it to your
I'm
list.
intrigued. I'm
Yes,
hooked.
it is. It is. It is what it sounds like. How to hook people and gets into
Yeah.
that behavioral sense of the word.
I feel like that would go along very well with that kind of like
Yep.
it's hard though because what you don't want to you want to get people hooked, but at the same time you think of things like Pinterest, for example, anything with infinite scroll.
Yep.
I I don't know how I feel about getting someone addicted to an application
Yep.
where they have to continuously, where they're spending hours and hours on
Yep.
your app and they don't have to. So it's
Yep.
a double-edged sword for sure.
It is. Oh, especially as I, who have a 12-year-old and a 10-year-old, my 12-year-old is very uh, eager to be hooked on things that he shouldn't be, and time melts away, and the games are a very, I mean, games in general are kind of meant to hook one, but the way they go through that manipulation process of getting you hooked, like what was one of the Clash of Clans was a great one, right? We're going to make you wait for your
Oh,
thing to get built before you can come back, and you're constantly checking your thing, and it's like, what the hell are you doing? Like, what a giant waste of time. Ingenious from an experience perspective, right? But hindsight being 2020, you guys realize like, whoa, I got totally sucked into this thing, and I'm just it's silly.
that
Uh,
reminds me of like just there's dark patterns for UX as well. So I don't know if you've ever seen like if you go to a website, you get a pop up. It's like a marketing pop up, like sign up for a newsletter
yep,
or save 10% today.
yep,
And the way that you close out of it is no thanks, I don't want to save money.
yep,
Like
yep,
that's just a jerk move in my
yeah,
opinion.
yeah.
Don't make people hate your site.
Yeah, yeah. I always like to just move the button when they hover over it, and we just move it over so they can just never really close it. I'm like, ha
Yeah,
ha.
that's a great one. That's super
Yeah,
usable.
yeah. Um, let's talk about skills for a bit. I mean,
Yeah.
how I mentioned earlier, we don't have enough designers. I personally love working with that kind of creative side of things. What what does one do if they want to get into that field? Do you have? I think at times we have this like stereotypical view that you have to be a super creative person and artsy and wear a turtleneck and all that, but I don't know that that's necessarily the case. So how does one who's interested in it become um, more interested in it, or I should
Yeah,
say more competent in it?
sure. I just want to go on record saying I don't own any turtlenecks, so
Yes,
um,
you will one
don't
day.
quite fit the mold. Yeah,
I'm gonna
one day.
send you. I'm gonna send you one of those quarter ones, or
Oh man. Um, yeah, so I think it goes two ways. So as someone who's maybe more interested or maybe more on the junior side of things, um, it's about finding a good mentor, finding
okay,
someone who's willing to help you along the way and give you advice. Because the biggest thing, especially in like a design creative related field, is that it's super subjective. So
yep.
I could design something, show it to 10 people and they love it, and I could show it to 10 more people and they hate it. And that's
So
really on
yeah,
the self-esteem.
I was gonna say. So how do you, Rachel? Are you just a thick-skinned person who can deal with it, or does it eat you up inside?
Sometimes it does. So it definitely does sometimes. Like, when I design something and I put a lot of work into it, I try not to get offended.
Sure.
And for the most part, I don't. It's really about finding the right kind of feedback. So if someone just says it sucks, I'm gonna be like, well, why?
Yeah.
Give me something constructive. And so when you get to that actual constructive side of the feedback of, I just thought it would look like this, or, I don't like this because it drives people away from my marketing site
Sure.
or whatever, then it takes the personalized side out of it. They're not
Sure.
talking about you as a designer. They're talking about the feature that you put out in front of them.
Sure.
And so that kind of helps separate the designer from the design.
Sure.
And so anytime you can get constructive feedback is great. So push a little more and don't get offended for it.
Sure.
And then there's also the side of, there's a lot of people who are interested in UX and development who are on that junior level side. It takes someone who is more mid to senior level or management level who's been in that career to ante up and say, hey, I'll be your mentor.
Yeah,
Like, I'm willing to help you with this. And a lot of times it's just me going to coffee with someone for them to kind of just figure out, is this something that I'm interested? Can you just tell me more about what you do
sure,
on a day-to-day basis? It's
sure.
super easy.
What I mean, you said go get a mentor, and I hear that a lot, and I know that I personally need one or multiple, and yet don't know how to necessarily provide value back to the person who would be willing to take me as a mentee. I always think of manatee for some reason, but
Oh,
which is
that's very good.
horrible. Yeah, I just made myself a giant water moose. Um, what like how do you find a mentor? How do you approach somebody to be a mentor? Because that's a very like give me something, and in that exchange, you clearly, I don't know, I guess for me, I always feel like I have nothing to offer if I'm asking you to give me everything.
Yeah, and I try not to look at it as like, I'm going to go out and find a mentor today.
Sure.
It's more, let's have a conversation. So I've met people at meetup groups, whether it's a UX meetup, an Agile meetup, or whatever it is. I've met people at conferences who, you give them your card and someone will actually send me an email back. And
Yep.
then it's both ways. So right now, I met someone this past October at Midwest UX and gave him my card, thought nothing would happen,
Sure.
and emailed me and was like, hey, I remember what you said here. And then it's just back and forth. He's looking for advice from me, and I'm looking to see, well, what do other people do in the profession? Like, I don't have all
Sure.
the answers. I could get something from him just like he could get something from me. And I think like having, I try not to look at it as like a junior senior level conversation, but more as like, we're on the same page and we're both getting something equally from this conversation.
How do you all right, let's say you find somebody and you're lost, whatever that means. I want to get more. I want to become more competent to be a designer, but I don't even have a clue what to ask. Like, how do you structure your questions? Like, what is it that you how do you best use their time?
As a mentee or a mentor?
Both. Well, let's say both. Let's start with the
Okay.
mentee.
Yeah. So if I'm a mentee and I find someone who I look up to, or, I go to a meetup group and I see a panel and I'm like, wow, that person's like speaking my language, I think.
Sure.
It's like, tell me, what does a typical day look like? Just anything that can get you more information of, is this something that I'm really interested in? Because if you don't know the questions yet, chances are you just don't know enough.
Right.
Um,
Yep.
yeah, so getting more information, whether it's asking questions or kind of like, hey, can you just talk about your process, or, where do you work? How do you do business there?
Sure.
And then as a mentor, I usually can see if someone is like, I think I really like this, but I don't know. I'll start asking them questions about like, well, what do you do? What parts of that are lacking in your current job? What do you want in a future job? What are things that you strive for? And I think that can kind of help me figure out, okay, are these skills the right skills, or are they going for the right thing anyway?
Sure.
If you're going for something and you tell me you want something totally different, I may be able to help push you in the right direction. Like, maybe UX isn't what you're looking for. Maybe you're looking more for like a product owner and managing the backlog, writing user stories,
Sure.
as opposed to actually designing things.
Sure. You mentioned kind of the senior junior relationship and us taking more of a active role into mentoring from that, I don't want to say hierarchical, but I don't know, experience level.
Hmm.
Should we be more formal about kind of succession planning, mentoring, helping our fellow geeks rise up?
So I take this very personally. I I was lucky enough when I was a junior level person to have a great person who gave me a chance, who took me under their wing and said, "Hey, like, let's do this, let's create things, and I'll help you along the way." So now that I'm more stable in my field, I feel confident in those skills. I want to do everything that I can to make it so that I don't hear people say, why don't we have good junior people, or why don't we have good senior level people? It starts by someone giving another person a chance.
Sure.
And helping them develop those skills. Because I think a lot of times we just assume that everyone's going to get there on their own. But I think if we think back to the way we started things,
Yep.
We'd find somebody who gave us a chance along the way. And
Sure.
so as a senior level person, I want to make sure that I can do the same thing that someone else did for me.
Sure. Does that happen only inside the workplace?
No, definitely not.
Does it ever happen inside the workplace?
Definitely, yes. Definitely both.
You never know.
I love that word. Yeah, for me, as my personal example, I used to be a print designer, and I found paper was very limiting for what I wanted to do. And I started kind of discovering what UX even was. I had no idea what it was. And
most don't, to be fair.
yeah, and I was the same way. And so when I designed my first UI, I was like, wow, God, if I could do this all day, every day, I would be so happy. And
Sure.
someone said, well, that's UI design. And I was like, what? That's a thing?
Yeah.
And I applied for a job, and someone said, hey, she doesn't have all the skills yet, but she's hungry to learn. I am willing to teach her.
Sure.
And, I want that for people. And specifically in UX, there's not a lot of UX internships. There's not a lot of junior UX roles around. There's a lot of stuff for senior level people, but we don't have the people to fill those roles because we don't have the people to train up to those roles.
Sure.
So we have to start somewhere.
Where does building your kind of portfolio outside of the workplace fall into creating opportunities in that realm of things?
Yeah, so I've sat down with former art directors, former graphic designers, specifically on the UX side, and I'll say, like, tell me what you're doing right now, and based on some of the things they tell me, I can say, oh, well, that's basically UX without the title.
Sure.
So I can tell you kind of things to highlight on your resume or things to talk to. I'm not a big fan of titles. I don't really care. So as long as you're doing those skills, I feel like you can transition those very easily into a new job, in not necessarily the same field.
How much studying do you do?
I do a little bit of a lot of things.
Yeah.
I read a lot of articles. I watch videos. I go to conferences. I love going to conferences. And I do some on-the-job training, like for SharePoint, if I have to learn SharePoint.
You gotta stop saying that word. Let me give you your first piece of advice as your newly minted mentor. Stop at the SharePoint.
Oh, if you can get my boss to get off of that, let me know.
Yeah.
So I try to do a little bit of everything because what I don't want is I don't want a single source of truth. I want multiple sources of truth. Just so that I can stay on the latest of lots of things. Because otherwise I feel like, I'll only learn one thing, I'll only focus on one thing, and it's not going to help me in the long run.
Yeah. What about studying, I don't want to say competitors, but like how much time do you spend like looking at other people's applications and going, okay, why does, you said Snapchat, like why did Snapchat fail? I have to assume as a senior level designer, you're taking other people's experiences and trying to either draw inspiration or prove your own hypotheses of this is why we should do a thing or why did this thing work? I don't know if that's policy or not, but
I use those kinds of experiences. Similarly, a few months ago now, actually, the whole missile crisis in Hawaii, when that came out, as like, oh, well, it was a drop down or it was a radio button or whatever it was. That's a great story that I can use in speaking or doing workshops, because a lot of times I use them for buy-in. If someone doesn't,
Sure.
A lot of times I'll get like, well, is that even possible? Is that real that you can actually get, this working just by doing a journey map? I can pull from that as an example and say, like, if we would have done this, this wouldn't have happened.
Sure.
So I definitely like to keep up on those kinds of stories. Snapchat's one I have to look into. But those kinds of redesigns are reasons why I say don't do a full redesign
Sure,
because
sure.
you see a lot of people jumping off or so it's ways that you can just add to the things that you're preaching.
What about culture?
What about culture?
Well, in on the development side of things, you don't it's very technical in nature, right? It's culture is right to left, left to right. It's the length of the Cyrillic characters, or well, German, right? Like let's just use every letter in the alphabet. Um, that's a very like binary decision of how to like make something work culturally, but in design, you actually have to take culture into account and so that broadens the horizons a bit of like how do you design something that works um, for different countries. And I'd have to guess it probably in the world that we live in today, probably even within one's country has some cultural impact. How does something happen in the valley versus, I don't know, rural Illinois? Um, how much time do you spend trying to dig into that culture piece of it?
Yeah, for those types of things, what I try to do most, and I actually saw a conference talk about this last year that really like inspired me, is just giving the right people the right place at the table. So, for example, if I want to understand, or if I'm building something, for a lot of cultures, I want to make sure I get multiple perspectives in the room to tell me, hey, whoa, let's stop on that. That's probably not a good idea. As an example, this diversity and inclusion talk that I went to last year, this like owner or president of the company came in and she said, we were designing a help icon and we used a police badge as the help. Like this is what you would do to
Yeah,
go get help.
sure.
And we had
Negative
someone who,
connotation for some.
yeah, yeah, we had someone who was black in the room helping with those design decisions and that said, whoa, hey, what are you thinking? Like that's not a positive connotation for me. I would steer clear of
Sure.
that. So I think especially with understanding different cultures, understanding, is the icons that I'm using correct? Is the language that I'm using something that means the same thing in France or in
Sure.
Germany? Whenever possible, getting that different perspective in there. If not, just doing some simple research and kind of
Sure.
looking at apps in Germany, in France, like getting a
Sure.
screenshot or something.
How um, this is probably another can of worms, but I'm going to ask it anyways. How do you? Those are hard questions to ask, and how do you ask questions, or how do you create an environment in which people feel safe that they can express one's opinion in this design aspect? Because I can just imagine you go out to your users and some of those questions are super super hard to ask. So I can imagine you wouldn't necessarily always get a factual result back.
Hmm.
So how do you create a place where your customers or your users or whatever that demographic is for that particular thing, how do we create a place that's safe, that people feel like they're not being judged and will say, hey, this badge is bullshit, like I don't use
Right.
it.
Yeah, on the user side, anytime you're usability testing, you want to make it very clear upfront to the user, nothing that you say is wrong. We're judging the design, we're not judging you. So making that very clear upfront that we have ground rules in this session and this session is about you. And it really helps if the person who designed that application or the person who made those decisions is not the person asking the questions.
There you go. Okay.
There's some separation there.
Yep.
And I think that's really important. As far as, making sure you have a diverse team or you have a team with multiple perspectives, whether it be a cultural perspective or even just a job role perspective,
Sure.
QA
Sure.
versus development, whatever,
Sure.
involving them in those conversations and being really that well-rounded team of cross-functional people.
Sure.
doing these things together. Me as a designer, like I look at myself as a professional facilitator. I'm not going to get offended if I design something wrong because we're all in it together.
Yeah.
And, we all feel safe to make those decisions and to have a voice there. So it's my job as a designer to say like, hey, we're all responsible for this. Like this is not solely my responsibility.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Before I get to my last question, because I think we could actually continue this conversation probably for the rest of the day, which would be good and bad for most reasons.
Right.
Because we're going to need some therapy sessions on this SharePoint thing.
I know.
I realize that that's a big deal in the enterprise, but I'm just saying you should feel funny inside. Saying
I do. Like, to be clear, like
okay.
I am not.
Okay. Well,
don't tell them that, but like.
I think it's too late. I think we already did. With that, at the end of these lovely editions, I like to extend a piece of gratitude and acknowledge you for the work that you have done. Not just thank you for being here on Ask That, but thank you for having spoke in the past at that conference. Thank you for being out there and being a change agent and trying to make others feel included in your field, although it's our field, but in your kind of section of the world, and creating those opportunities for others. So on behalf of myself and everybody else who's around, thank you for putting yourself out there and doing that.
Thank you for giving me the space to do it.
This is why we did it. Like it's all about the story. It's all about us breaking down those walls to give others those opportunities. So with that, on the softer side of things, what would be the Rachel Krause like piece of advice, the call to action, the go do? I hate that word. Go do is so stupid. But what would be your like, hey, you're inspirational, pick up the horse and go do this?
I think on a developer or non-UXer side of things, it would be to take action when someone who is looking for design input wants your input. They really do want it and participate in that. As a UXer, be okay that other people are coming into your process because you're really gonna, you all have the same goal. You're all gonna get there faster if you work together. And for everybody, whether you're a junior or senior level person, whether you're a mentor, a mentee, just reach out and communicate with each other. You all have something to offer each other. And rather than have those labels, just have a conversation and, make connections.
I love it. I like how you broke it down into like 3 personas too.
Yeah, it's my job.
Yeah. No, but I love it. I absolutely love it. With that being said, we have reached the end of our little live stream here, but I implore you to drop some comments below. Let us know things that have worked for you, challenging times, good times, how you dealt with them, good designs, bad designs. You got questions for Rachel, you got questions for me. Drop them in the comments. We're here to answer them. Give us a thumbs up if you like it. If you don't like it, call support. Rachel, how do people get in touch with you?
Yeah, there's a few ways you can get in touch with me. I'm pretty active on Twitter, at Rachel Krause. I make it easy by dropping the SE. So at Rachel Krause on Twitter, send me a message, tweet at me, whatever. And then I'm also on the interwebs at rachelkrause.com.
Now supports HTTPS.
Yeah, as of today. Thanks, Clark.
New features. Here at Ask That, we're not just having a conversation. We are making the world more secure.
I was like, crap, I should really make that more secure.
Yeah, and here I just assumed. Yeah, totally. That should work.
It was a good assumption, so thank you for that.
Well, thank you again for being on this lovely edition, and thank you everybody for watching. Until next time.